Hey, welcome everyone. This week we have our beautiful author Meredith Sims with us. So I'd like to welcome Meredith. Hi.
Thank you, Lulu. It's lovely to be here with you.
Great. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a background who Meredith is. So she wrote chapter 14, which is called Inspired Wealth, Creating an Intentional Plan for Your Money. And Meredith's background comes in the financial realm. So she's an independent financial advisor specializing in financial planning and socially responsible and impact investing. And she loves empowering women with their money. So just share with our viewers just a little bit about your chapter. I liked the tools. You gave some really great tools. And I know that you're going to share that again with our viewers. So, yeah, just share a little bit about your chapter, Meredith.
Yeah, so in the chapter, I tell a little bit about my story and how I, came to the place that I am now in my business and in this industry, because the financial industry can seem very intimidating, I think, to a lot of people. It can feel very dry and very numbers oriented, and of course numbers are very important, but at the end of the day, what I think I came to for my own personal kind of evolution in the industry is that it's really about people living fulfilled lives and having their structures support them in that. And so we all have structures in our lives, and finance is just one of those structures. And what I think people often miss, and I think is often missing from the planning conversation, is this whole idea of what's really important. Now, that might sound like a pretty obvious question. What's important? I mean, you need to have a house or somewhere to live. You need a roof over your head. You need food. But beyond those basics, I think it's very easy for people, particularly if they're not engaged with their money, to be on autopilot. And to never really consider, why are they working in that job? Why are they saving that money? Are they happy in what they're doing in their life? And I think it's really interesting that we've been through this past year that we've been through, because, well, I guess past 2 years, 2020 was the big one, because, there've been a lot of life changes for people. I'm sure many who have decided to change profession or move cities or move closer to family. And so it was a big wake-up call. And I think what I am pointing to in my chapter is this idea of being really, really clear of about what you value, what brings you happiness, and then make sure that you very intentionally direct your money and your time towards that. And I think that's, kind of the fundamental point that I'm trying to get across in the chapter.
And I like how you touch on the values. Last week when we spoke with Rivka, we talked about values as well. And often we carrying values from our family that we don't realize. And then we get to a certain age and we're like, I wonder if this is really my value or something I've just, adopted. So, and particularly for women, often they've given over some of their power in their families or in their relationships, and they've not dealt with their money in some ways. So this is about coming back to each individual person, knowing what's true for them and their values, which I love that you talk about this in your chapter. And, we are personal friends, Meredith and I, and as you can probably, for our viewers and our readers, you can hear that we both have the similar accent. We're both Australian, but we both live here in the US. So, we come from probably even a slightly different value upbringing than maybe some Americans. So we can bring that into our conversation. And I know that you've even spoken to younger women about their money, and which is, a wonderful thing to support. Because as we know, we're all living and we all need to have these structures in place, as you said. So, I liked what you said, and I do remember us surfing. So I like how you bring into your chapter the things that, that you want to do in life, as well as, so it's having your money and knowing what it does, but also having that to do and experience new things. So yeah, just tell us a little bit maybe about, your travels or your hobbies or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, and I have more to say on that whole concept of how we spend our time as well. It's something I'm going to be, I've written a short note about for my next newsletter and email. But yeah, so it's a really interesting thing that and you know this yourself, Lulu, because you're such a huge proponent of women living a fully expressed life, that as we get older, we start to kind of recognize and dismantle some of those rules and ideas and, sort of just the constructs, I suppose, that we find ourselves in by virtue of either our profession or the families we grew up in or our cultural upbringing, things that, are just how they are. And I think one of the awesome things about getting older is like having this epiphany and this realization that, you only live once and it's time to start exploring. And so, yeah, recently, probably in the last 4 years or so, I took up first surfing for the first time. I took up ballet for the first time, which is, like neither of those are easy things to do, but they both make me incredibly happy. Even though I've done very little surfing, I plan to do more. So one of the things that I think, is important is to be clear about what makes you happy. And sometimes, I've spoken to you about this, how I did that values questionnaire, and I discovered that like going out to dinner with friends didn't necessarily hit my values. And I was making myself, a little bit wrong about that. It's like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to dine out with your friends? But it wasn't that specifically. There were certain essences or essential elements that needed to be in place for that to be a valuable experience for me in terms of what my values are. And so, if it was in Italy, it would be fabulous, or it could just be somewhere really lovely with a nice outlook, like if it was in a beautiful garden, or there are other elements that needed to be in place. And those elements didn't necessarily mean more money. It could be a cup of coffee would get me as much reward from, that exchange of money and time as dining in a fine restaurant. And everyone has examples of those, and some of them are pretty obvious. It's not like you have to do a detailed questionnaire to get to the root of that, but it is insightful, because as I noted for myself, I think about this stuff all the time, and it was still a bit of an epiphany for me to discover that when I was, doing the exercise myself. So, yeah, I don't know if you want me to say more about traveling and so on. But
this is a reminder to the viewers, that the things that you want that touch your heart, your soul, are true for you. And so, look for those. It's nearly like giving ourselves permission that we've not given ourselves before. And I'm just going to point out that you've touched on one of my high values. You've used my favorite word twice. Epiphany. You've used it twice.
And I remember you had written about that.
And I'm like, wow, she's clever. On a side note, I've just got to show you that I've got my Australian echidna.
Oh, very nice.
Little painted scarf on today for us Australians. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, knowing what our values are and getting kind of tailoring them down to know what little elements we need for us. So I do have a few questions.
Can I give you a plug while we're at it on the subject of epiphany? So Lulu states epiphany, which clearly I'd forgotten, as her favorite word in the writing in her beautiful book, Soul Blessings, which if you haven't seen is a lovely collection of words and images that, bring joy to the hearts of people who view it. So check it out.
Thank you, Meredith. So as each Wholehearted Chat, we've been, getting to know each author and asking them just some questions about their life. So I just wanted to ask you, who has been your most influential person in your life?
Yeah, that was a challenging one. Because I can't say it's been one individual. I mean, we talked about this. I definitely feel I'm the product of my family. I was fortunate to have a very stable upbringing, very, very ordinary middle class upbringing. And that's both, I've been, I guess, been a constraint in terms of how I view myself in the world, but also a lovely platform. I really have a great family to fall back on and be related to. So, but then I was thinking in recent years in my industry, which is, obviously one that is evolving over time, it's still, I would say it's still very male dominated. But, there are more and more women advisors in this field. So it might sound strange to say this, but one of the gentlemen that I follow in that realm is a gentleman by the name of Carl Richards, and he's a real thought leader in the space. He's an author and international speaker, and he's all about planning and advising based around people living a fulfilled life and living their goals and not just planning by rote. And so I think he's been a breath of fresh air for me, because I didn't grow up, if you will, in the non-traditional side of the industry. And then the other one along the lines of money, and we've already talked about her before, is Lynn Twist and her book, The Soul of Money. And there are lots of fabulous books out there around money, but she's just one of the early ones that I read that really struck me in terms of how she thought about it.
Yeah, thank you. And your favorite hobby? Like, I know you've just told us about ballet and surfing, but I know there's other things. So what's your favorite hobby?
Well, if I ever did it, Lulu, it'd probably be painting. I do love art. My mother was an artist, and she, for as long as I remembered, she was always creating something. So I think I inherited that, but I have not spent a lot of time, pursuing it. So in the absence of that, I would say my garden is probably my obsessive hobby, if you will. I think about it a lot.
And, being out in nature is always one of those kind of healing things. But I find that too, because we both do have that creative and artistic pull in our life. And that too is very, very healing. And even if it can be a couple of months between doing something, and then you're in front of a canvas and you're like, oh, why aren't I here more often? You get that nourishment from doing those things. So yes, we'll have to key up another painting expedition.
Definitely.
Share us a little bit about your world travel, because I know you've been many places, and you have some places you really love. So share a little bit about that.
Gosh, where do I start? I mean, obviously, I love visiting my family in New Zealand and Australia, and I'm up until 2020, I was doing that on a pretty regular basis. I would say some of the highlights, though, have been Machu Picchu was a highlight. I mean, and that was a lot of my travel has happened. You had asked about miracles, one of your questions. So a lot of my travels have been kind of spur of the moment and serendipitous. The trip to Peru when I went to Machu Picchu was, I lined that up about 3 days before I left.
Wow.
And it was really one of those sea changes where I had been thinking, oh, there's no way I can do that. I'm too busy. That's a familiar, if anyone has that familiar refrain, it can stop you from doing a lot of fun things. To a conversation with a friend late on Monday night, where I realized, well, maybe I'm not that busy. And I flew out that Thursday. So, and it was an extraordinary experience. I went with a group that were taking computers and supplies for some of the schools in different places in Peru. And actually, interestingly, the woman who led that trip is also responsible for another serendipitous and unexpected journey. I had not seen my friend Anne, who is actually an inspiration, I have to say. I mean, she's been inspiring me for a long time. I mean, she's never let opinion or her age, and she's probably a good 10, maybe 20 years older than me, stop her from anything. So I had arranged a coffee with her and a friend, and she just happened to mention that she was going to be in Istanbul, traveling from Kenya. And I was like, wow, I've always wanted to go to Istanbul. And she said, well, why don't you come? And I was already planning to be in Italy. And it was just one of those miraculous moments where when I looked at my ticket, not only could it just as easily fly home via Istanbul as Frankfurt, which was where it was routed, I was going to, when I later discovered when she was going to arrive, I was leaving and would arrive on exactly the same day that she was planning to be there. Wow. So, and then that was fabulous because I mean, I had always wanted to go there, and it was really, it was only a short few days, but it was just another kind of fun. I like, I like being around other cultures, I guess. It's just kind of interesting. And I mean, there's a lot of beauty there as well.
And the richness of the way of life and, art, architecture, nature, all those things coming in. Yeah. And I know I did ask you about, have you had ever experienced a miracle or an answer to prayer? So I know you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but is there anything else that you feel that you've, experienced as a miracle?
I couldn't really say that I have. I mean, I guess I tend to think of miracles as big things, and you possibly are not referring to them that way, when someone's ill and they pray and have a miracle, and so for me, I don't feel like I've had that type of experience, but I definitely feel that I've had a lot of synchronistic, serendipitous, miraculous, if you like, occurrences in my life, but perhaps on a small scale, although always impactful.
And that's so that's a reminder to all of us that, if we're thinking that we're looking for that one big miracle, but Meredith's already touched on numerous little daily type miracles or yearly miracles that she's already had. So, being aware as they come to you and, taking them in and allowing them to lead you as well. I find that's kind of where miracles, do touch our life.
Yeah. And, it's kind of just being aware and open. And, I'll give you a little thing that Anne said, which was very kind of her. I said to her, when we were leaving Istanbul, I said, that was just so wonderful. Thank you for, inviting me into this group. She was traveling with a few other people and allowing me to come. And she said to me, well, many people would have heard me say that, but you actually jumped up and did it. And I thought to myself, well, that's true. And I think, it doesn't have to be travel. A lot of people, travel is not a high value, or travel overseas may not be a high value for them, but it's really being, I think, aware and open to things as they arise, which, I mean, I've definitely said I'm too busy and not done things and regretted it, but there's a lot that I have kind of managed to put that aside and gone out and done something different.
Yeah.
Well, your invitation to Nicaragua was a prime example, and Laura and I surfing, I mean, in those heady waves, 3 hours from the nearest hospital for the very first time. Possibly not the smartest thing to do, but fun.
Yeah. So I invite each of the authors to share something they'd like to share with our viewers. So Meredith will be dropping that into the chat afterwards, but she's going to share what she's got to offer you. She'll tell you what that is.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, we have been talking about values and the values resources. So I am going to put the link to how you would get access to those if you want to use those. And I mean, you know, they're not fancy tools, but if you do the work of them, I think you'll learn something. And then the other is, if you would like to have a chat with me, then I'm also going to put my calendar link in there, and you are free to set up a complimentary consult with me. That's always a process where we talk about, you know, your goals and values, where you're at now, and, you know, what would be the next steps for you. So I think that can, even if you don't work with me, that can be a useful clarity forming exercise, just that, going through that process.
What a beautiful thing to offer to our readers and viewers. So as you can hear, you know, Meredith, even though she's in the financial and, you know, planning area of her life, she is a very well-rounded and richly I'm not even sure, delightful person is what I want to say.
Thank you, Lulu.
She brings a lot to the table, and I'm so pleased that you are part of this book. You know, I know
me too.
You were like, oh, is what I do, you know, part of that, and it so adds to the book and gives something to women who, you know, in their 50s and over, that, you know, can be very helpful for them. So I really appreciate you being part of that and sharing with us today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity, Lulu, and I appreciate that you saw that I could make a contribution in that book. And despite once again my innate reluctance and hesitance, that you kind of had me jump into the fray and be a part of it. It was really a fabulous experience. So thank you.
Great. So there's that last little message for you. If you've had someone invite you into something, it's time to jump in right now. If you're one of the viewers watching the replay, maybe that's where you need to step into as well. So many blessings. Thank you so much, Meredith.
Thank you, Lulu. This was fabulous.